Alrighty, the Vengeance Factor. I have to say that this is one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek ever. Up in the top 5 of all of Star Trek, this one. Why? Because it's an Alien of the Week episode that does such a deep dive into the Alien of the Week that it actually gives you a reason to, one, not see the Alien of the Week as a monoculture, which is something very rare in Star Trek because usually they don't pay enough attention to the Alien of the Week and why the Alien of the Week is the way they are in order to portray them as anything other than a monoculture. In fact, a lot of the times the Alien of the Week, you only really see one example of the Alien of the Week. This one, the core of the episode is actually about a conflict between multiple factions of the Alien of the Week and how those conflicts have taken form over a period of decades. And that made it such an interesting episode. Because you have Utah. Then you find out that Utah is actually something like 70 or 80 years old, even though she looks like she's in her 20s and looks like she's in her 20s by Acamarian standards, and that her youthful appearance is considered unnatural by Acamarian standards. Now, one thing that's never explained in this episode is that if the Trelesta clan had somehow found the way to make Yuta stop aging, why couldn't they do that with anyone else? What technology did they use to make Yuta stop aging? Yeah, that's a fun question. This episode has, in many ways, a very limited focus. It's, however, akin to, instead of casting a net in an ocean, you cast a net in a 3 fathoms deep shaft. Very, very limited scope. Everything has to do with the Acamarians. Like, the A plot, B plot, and C plot in this episode are all Acamarians doing things. Different things. You can't even say Acamarian things for Acamarian reasons because Acamarian reasons are often conflicting with each other. Alrighty. So, we start with a raid by the Acamarian gatherers, who are kind of sort of pirates, against a Federation outpost. The Enterprise gets called to deal with the problem and realizes that several things have been stolen, and the base is actually not badly trashed, but, there's several. It's pretty badly messed up. And, of course, they find a trace of blood, which is identified very quickly as Acamarian blood. Why? Because Acamarians are the only race known in all of Star Trek to have blood that it has a mixture of hemoglobin and hemocyanin. Or not hemocyanin, cyanoglobin. Actually, you know what? Given that it's fiction, you might actually call it hemocyanin, whatever. This is interesting because the majority of races have hemoglobin-based blood. Humans, it's a very long list. And there are many races that have green blood that is copper-based, which cyanoglobulin. Anyways, so it's very strange that the Acamarians are a mixture of the two. And it makes Acamarian blood easily identifiable because the fact that you don't even need to sequence the DNA. You like, oh, it's cyanoglobulin or whatever. And that's obviously Acamarian. Also, it's an unusual color. Now, that as a starting point, it's like, oh, there was a pirate raid and we found blood from one of the pirates, and it's obviously Acamarian. So Picard does a diplomatic inquiry at the Acamarian homeworld, and then you have Sovereign Maruk, who is like, oh, yes, that was obviously the Gatherers because the rest of the Acamarians are peaceful and not warlike or pirates. So obviously it's the Gatherers, which is actually true. However, we eventually find out that the reason the Gatherers are who they are is not as simple and clear cut as Maruk makes it sound. Because at one point in time, the Acamarians were a feudal civilization where each of their um, clans would, this is our territory, and we would fight to protect our territory and, attack our enemies and so on and so forth. And this would result in an endless series of wars. One of those wars ended with the Tralesta Massacre. Here's the thing. The Tralesta Massacre happened in 2286. All that stuff Maruk said about the Acamarians being a peaceful, benevolent society, yeah, it's a cultural change that happened within her lifetime. It was not that way when she was born. It is how their race came to live while she was alive. And in parts, that seems to be because of the fact that the wars had reached a point where the majority of the Acamarians who opposed the idea of uniting into a single world government had been killed off. The rest of them fled their home system and became the Gatherers. And yeah, which is part of the thing that's interesting about this is because the Gatherers actually made colonies on other planets, and while those colonies were in fact funded by piracy and stuff like that, said colonies weren't necessarily a bad thing for the Acamarians to have. Which is where oh, also another thing, the Acamarian wars, where they were fighting each other, were apparently fought using bioengineered weapons. You see, a major plot point is that Yuta has a microvirus that her body is constantly emitting that is only fatal to members of the Lornak clan or descendants of the Lornak clan, because it keys onto a specific um, cellular marker and kills anyone who has that particular cellular marker, which is apparently something that the Lornax have and no one else does. And this is something that the Acamarians had developed using their own science. This isn't one of those things where it's like, oh, we found mysterious alien. No, no. The Acamarians developed this on their own. Also, what I mentioned earlier with the whole thing with Yuta being something like 70 or 80 years old and looking like a young woman by Acamarian standards, again, that was artificial bioengineering, that they somehow managed to prevent her from aging. No explanation of that. But and also is that apparently the wars and the Trelesta massacre weren't, fought using direct physical violence. Some of them, well, I hear is that the clan Lornek used chemical and biological weapons. The reason that the Trelesta got massacred was apparently some sort of bioweapon. So that adds an interesting wrinkle to the Acamarian civilization, is that these guys actually are a relatively advanced race when it comes to scientific knowledge, and certain aspects of their technology are something that even the Federation would have reason to think about carefully and not just write them off as, oh, those guys on that backwater planet that we don't care about. Yeah, they don't actually go into a huge amount of detail about the Acamarians' technological capabilities. Although there is the fact that the reason Maruk gets taken by Picard to this meeting with the Gatherer leader in the Enterprise is that Maruk does not have the ability to simply have an Acamarian ship that is loyal to her fly her there. She needs Picard to do it, which is interesting because it suggests that the Acamarian starships are relatively technologically inferior to those of the Federation. And we do actually have uh, reason to believe that, because this was the most powerful ship that the Gatherers had, and it was a fraction of the size of the Enterprise and had a fraction of the firepower of the Enterprise. Notably, it was said to have phasers, and these are like a hot pink color. Yeah, a lot of people are like, oh, phasers are orange. No, they really aren't. Phasers are whatever color the person writing that particular episode wants them to be. Canonically, whatever the whatever energy frequency that particular phaser was tuned to determines the color of the phaser beam, and what color it is varies based on who built the phaser and how they were configuring it when they built it. In fact, in one of the Borg episodes, they actually retune the energy frequency of the phasers while they're fighting the Borg. Anyways, though, that is a lot of stuff about the Acamarians. And playing with this in a TTRPG, yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff you could toy with here. Because, again, it's an episode with a very narrow focus, but it's a super, super deep analysis of a single alien race and their lack of having a monoculture. The part about the episode that I personally disliked most, and something that isn't actually how it ends, is that while the gatherers did, agree to a truce and stuff, they didn't actually just go home. Which, whether Acamarians wanted the gatherers to abandon the outposts they'd established outside their home system is kind of strange, honestly. You would think the Acamarians would not want to solely live on their homeworld with no space force whatsoever. And yet that seems to be the direction that the episode was pushing them in. It was like, wait, what? Why is it bad to have the gatherers living on other worlds? Okay, the gatherers being pirates was bad. The gatherers having um outposts outside the Acamarian system, not so much. Well. Anyways, having players deal with Acamarian raiders and clan warfare, yeah, that's a totally a thing you could do. Because it's what the show did with it. And it's a good, source of drama for a plot. Also, Acamarian bioweapons are also totally a thing you could do. Of course, the nature of the specific microvirus that Yuta was using is something that is very, very quickly deadly because of the fact that it destabilizes someone's central nervous system in a matter of minutes. Yeah, that's a super whatever virus by real world standards. Having someone get infected and then die in less than a day is an incredibly quick killing virus by real world standards. Having them die in minutes is just bonkers off the wall. Anyway, though, yeah, Acamarians as a race that has the ability to make bioweapons that are specifically targeted, because one of the things with this is that the Trelesta clan, the bioweapon that they created, was something specifically designed to only target the Lornak clan and not kill the Acamarian populace in general. Which is why Yuta was able to simply infect herself with it and just walk around being a plague carrier. Which, it works, I guess. Oh well. So yeah. One of those civilizations that Star Trek did a lot with, but then they just kind of like forgot about them for the most part. They did actually show up later, but as a bit part. It's like, oh yes, Acamarians were also here. Blah. Also an interesting looking race. It's like, yes, they're kind of sort of like a rubber forehead alien and not a particularly interesting rubber forehead alien, to be honest, but there's a subtle what's the best way to put this? The way that the Acamarian makeup was used isn't just uniformly this person has a wrinkle on their forehead and that's it. There's all other stuff that goes with it, like the whole like facial tattoos thing. That was actually another thing that was interesting, is that part of the whole unification thing that the Acamarians did was basically to outlaw clan based social structures. And it's just like, wait a second, that's kind of sort of like subjugating your own race. Is that really the way you want it to go. And like I said earlier, is that that's very questionable as to whether that's a shall we say moral or ethical way of going about it. Because, you know, the only reason why Acamarian civilization got to that point is that the dissenting parties literally left the planet. That's the only reason why they came to a consensus on doing it that way. Oh, also, um, the one time we actually see her kill someone with the virus, a heart attack. It's like he gets infected with the virus, and it causes his the nerves controlling his heart to stop working, and then he just don't dead. Nothing particularly interesting, but for it's something that is actually workable as a, a way of killing someone in a TTRPG. It's like, oh, she touched him. His face gets a weird contortion to it, and then he falls over dead. And obviously, in terms of special effects budget, you're just in the episode itself. The actress literally just touches him. There's no special effects whatsoever. Then they do this explanation of why the guy died because she touched him. Alrighty then. Well, I hope that gave you some interesting food for thought about what to do with this episode, because it's a very strange thing for a Star Trek episode. And part of the reason why I liked it so much is having a non-monoculture alien race. The unfortunate part is that having them being depicted as a non-monoculture was treated by the episode as a bad thing that needed to be resolved and fixed and was bad and wrong. And that's something that I don't really like in Star Trek, but whatever. It's not something that they really try to go with too hard. But the whole like, hey, we all want to be one big happy family, even though we don't want the same thing. Yeah, that is a moral and ethical question that you can pose to your players. It's like, is it really right to try to force everyone to live in the same box? Which ultimately was the source of the Acamarians' clan feuds, is that they wanted to have their own boxes, but some of the clans wanted to force the other clans to live in a different box than the one that they were actually living in. Is it right to try to force that matter? Well, millions of deaths later, the Acamarians still haven't answered that question. Oh well. I think that's enough for this one. See you guys next time.